Hello and welcome to episode 17 of 21 for 21 Sports Media Lessons in the 21st Century. Very excited today, Stuart, because we've got our first American guest on. We had a Canadian last week. This week we have our first American guest, Lowell Stevens. Welcome to the podcast. Lowell's going to talk to us about the metaverse and esports, which are two topics that we've kind of had on our radar for a little while now. And I have to admit, I've done a little bit of work with the League of Legends team here in Barcelona, and I sort of followed the Super League from a distance. But it's something I otherwise don't know very much about, and I certainly don't know very much at all about the metaverse, Stuart. I don't know if you've got any more knowledge coming into this episode.
I mean, no, it's like back to. I'm really excited to have Lowell here because this is almost back to what we're doing right at the start of the podcast. We did a lesson on TikTok, a lesson on Twitch, and then we went in this sport media direction for a few episodes. Now it's really nice for us to sit back and learn something about some of these industry buzzwords. So Lowell, thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
So maybe we should sort of kick off with just sort of find out about who is Lowell Stevens and kind of what's your background that brings you into this space, because you've been quite busy from what I can see on kind of LinkedIn and your social medias in terms of what is the metaverse and esports.
Yeah, sure. So, well, I'll start from the very beginning. I got my first Game Boy at 7 years old. Started playing Game Boy Color games all the way up until about high school. I ended up getting a chance to play Halo with a team. So we went to these regional tournaments. It was fantastic. It was really exciting. But that was back in the day. I like to tell people that was back in the day where winning a tournament got you like a $50 Applebee's gift card, and that was it. So it wasn't really a viable career path, back in 2007, 2008, as much as it is today. So I ended up kind of falling away from that. Just kept on playing games as a hobby. And then it really picked back up when I moved to South Korea after college. I had some friends there that were teaching English. They were like, "Hey, you should move here. It's great." And I was like, "Okay, sure, I'll do it." I had an English degree. I thought, what else will I do with it? So I ended up moving to Busan and stayed there for about a year and a half, teaching English. And then I moved to Taiwan. And the way I got into the esports world was actually kind of coincidental. I was dating a girl in Taipei, and she was actually friends with Sword Art from, at this point, he was in Flash Wolves. And so I went to a house party and I met Sword Art and I met some of the other Flash Wolves. And I was chatting with them and I was like, "What do you guys do?" And they're like, "Oh, we play League of Legends." I was like, "What is this game?" Because I was a console gamer. I was a filthy console gamer for most of my life. Didn't play PC games. Didn't really play League of Legends. Got into it and got really, really sucked in by the game. And that was kind of my entry drug into the esports world. So after about a year and a half in Taipei, I ended up moving back to Korea. But my goal was to work in esports. And considering my peak rank was like gold 1, probably wasn't going to be a player. So I ended up working on a sort of esports communication program for a pro team. I ended up getting picked up by Genji, and Genji had just recently started their Genji Global Academy, which was an esports academy in Seoul. So I moved up to Seoul, and I ended up working with them for the last about 2 years. And then just recently in December, I left Korea, came back to the US, and I just started a metaverse design company called Fox and Farthing.
Oh, so certainly a lot of experience there, Lowell. So I mean, like we've had a lot in this podcast. It's been people who aren't quite good enough at playing their chosen sports to go into work in it. So this is the same, but with the esports example. So could you do a bit more explanation of what it is you were doing in the academy in Seoul?
Yeah, sure. So basically, what I had realized was esports had a fundamental flaw in that there was very little professionalism in the industry as a whole, from the front office to the back office, and players, to everyone else. It's just essentially the way the industry had evolved was players made a lot of money playing games back in, like, 5-10 years ago, and they would take that 100,000 or 200,000 or $1 million that they made, and then they would start a team, and they would essentially be someone who dropped out of high school, not disparaging, but they were someone who dropped out of high school, didn't go to college, and they're now running what is essentially a multi-million-dollar business. And the issue with that was the players would behave unprofessionally, the staff would behave unprofessionally. It's that, from every perspective. And the point that GGA was trying to do was they wanted to create more well-rounded players and esports professionals. So actually, the academy is fascinating because Genji is not necessarily interested in just creating esports players. They're interested in creating esports professionals. So basically, ad executives who might work in the esports industry, or businessmen or whatever. And so what I was doing is I was teaching these esports professional communication classes. So I did in-game communication. So we would look at things like the Navy SEALs or Army Rangers and how they would communicate on the battlefield. And we would take those techniques and apply them to in-game communication as far as mic discipline. And then we would also run simulations. So I would basically sit down and pretend to negotiate a contract with them, or pretend to negotiate an advertisement, or help them read like legalese as far as these contracts are concerned. And so a lot of it was less games than they, I think, were initially expecting. But when my students ended up getting positions, a couple of them went to pro Overwatch teams. One of them is a trainee for Damwon. And they ended up, they would send me messages on Instagram or Twitter or whatever, and be like, "Hey, I thanks so much for your class. It really helped me. I got way more money than I thought I would get." So, it ended up working out really well.
We've got something in common in that I came to Barcelona as an English teacher. There are some skills. There are some skills there that you've just described in what you were teaching esports. Gamers is not a word, is it? Competitors, or there's a certain vocabulary that goes with this world. I certainly don't have a good handle on. But there's some skills there that, I taught business English, and there was negotiation. There was, thinking about communicating outside of kind of just the language. So I definitely see some like transferable skills there in terms of what you took from one career to the next.
Yeah, 100%.
That's really interesting, because so I've had some interaction with esports competitors, very limited so, but I was quite surprised at kind of, I very much had this idea of like, it's just some guys that play video games professionally. They're just really good at video games, right? They were League of Legends players, but they kind of said, they actually spend a lot of time together, and so they train physically together as well. They all go to the gym together and do workouts. I kind of meant to build that kind of team bond and that communication. So that's certainly really interesting, and I think maybe you comment a little bit on your time in this world of how it's become professionalized from when you first kind of entered into that world.
Yeah, certainly. So one thing the reason that I joined Gen G over any other team was because they have a commitment to, first of all, they were purchased from Samsung Galaxy, which won Worlds a few years ago. And this new organization, KSV, which purchased them, became Gen G. And Gen G was really focused on professionalism in their own industry. So all of their executives are very highly educated. They have master's degrees. They came from excellent universities in the United States and in Korea. And so what I was really excited to see when I was there was that escalation in professionalism compared to other organizations. So as far as like the internships that they had the students do, they it's easier, I think. I feel like for people who are outside this world, this feels like a baseline, right? However, I think if you look at other examples, so an example, I don't want to drag them too much, but an example would be TSM in the United States right now. for people who don't know, TSM, the owner of that is Reginald. He was a player of League of Legends starting back in like season 1, so about 2011. He ended up retiring and just starting the organization. He's famous for bullying his players. He's under investigation by the league. I think recently there was some sort of controversy, and without a PR rep, without anything, went on Reddit and just went on this unhinged rant about a former player of his. So that's kind of like the baseline right now in esports. And there's also been a nepotism problem as well. People who started on at the team like 6 years ago, 7 years ago, and they were like a social media manager with a community college degree, and they ended up working their way up to like president, vice president, whatever, and they just don't have the skills or the knowledge to do the job effectively. And I touched on this in one of my papers. It's been kind of a growing issue for esports, especially as more money tries to get in. It's, to the industry. It's being bottlenecked by these people who are not necessarily qualified for their positions. And when that happens, it turns off investors. It turns off people who might be, venture capitalists or someone who's looking to sell venture debt, things like that. So, it's been. I love the industry personally. It's something that I'm passionate about. I would do it for free. And so seeing esports being kind of, I would say, crippled by this, endemic plague has been one of the reasons that I started what I did. And it's actually kind of the reason that I'm moving into.
So I guess this is from what you've been saying. It's almost like these early seasons of the leagues, like you mentioned, is almost like some sort of Wild West where it's a bit unregulated and it's the kids running it themselves. But it's now moving into more of a professional sphere with the suits almost taking charge. So we've seen a lot in Europe. So a lot of the big European soccer teams like Barcelona and PSG are launching their teams as well. So would you say that's a good thing for the sport, for esports, that it's attracting these blue chip famous teams, or has it almost lost a bit of its innocence, esports, in a way that it's been taken out of the hands of the kids and into the adults?
I think people could argue both ways, and I think it's the same for every sport, right? When you've got a soccer team and it's just 20 guys and they've got a little club somewhere and they're doing it for the love of the game. I recently watched the English game. I don't know if you guys have seen that. It was really interesting to me. It was about the rise of professionalism.
The Downton Abbey of soccer. No, it's I know it, but I never saw it. No.
Oh, is it? It's got that reputation.
It's okay. The same writer, I think, as Downton Abbey. So that sort of era.
Oh yeah.
Thing, yeah.
Well, I would highly recommend it. I loved it. It was really fascinating to see how professionalism rose in soccer, and it was really interesting to me to actually compare that to esports. So yeah, there is a loss when you start paying people, when esports is not just going to be for the love of the game. But I think that that's necessary. So in a sense, I think that a lot of people say there's players, right? And there's fans, and then there's suits. But what's interesting to me is I think that suits can be fans. And I think that there are suits that were fans or still are fans right now that are doing it because they're fans. For example, some of my bosses at Gen G were very highly educated. They worked in the Major League Baseball. They worked at Blizzard. They worked at like big companies. And they came to Gen G not because of the salaries were outsized. They came because they loved it and they wanted to see esports succeed. So are they suits? Yeah. They are businessmen first, but I think that they're striking a very healthy balance. Whereas if you've got someone who, is respected, but is a high school dropout trying to run a multi-million-dollar company, I think that's worse for the sport as a whole than having someone who might be slightly less passionate, but slightly more educated.
it's I think it's always really easy to kind of like draw parallels or compare differences with traditional sports. But these kind of esports athletes, in sometimes very similar, sort of headspace, if you like, or to other pro athletes. They've I don't know, they've not got an academic career, so they've headed into the way of professional sports or semi-professional sports. There are various kind of parallels in that sense. Are there other kind of major similarities with like traditional sports teams, or maybe there's some big differences as well as you've noticed along the way?
Yeah, so I'm a massive fan of American football. I'm a big Eagles fan. I watch it a lot, and I would say that a lot of people seem to think that, like, I'm sure not everyone, but a lot of people seem to think that esports don't have like a competitive drive. It's like, oh, you're just sitting there playing video games, whatever. Um, and I would say that's the biggest parallel, is just as badly as a football player wants to win the game, or a soccer player's out training 8-10 hours a day trying to become the best, or enter the Premier League or whatever. I think it's the same for esports players. I saw esports players that would they would play for 12-15 hours a day. Or here's the thing, it's not just playing. Sometimes they would go into the practice tool in League of Legends, or go into an aim trainer, and they would do that for 6 or 8 hours, and it's mind-numbingly boring. It's not enjoyable at all. And they would do this till their fingers are bleeding, essentially. And it was because they wanted to be the best. There was a drive for perfection. And I think that's what can be most admirable. The issue with esports, when you see someone, in football, if you see someone like Matt Stafford drop back and throw a 60-yard pass to Cooper Kupp in the end zone, you see that and you know that's difficult. I couldn't do that, right? When you see Faker flash a wall and LeBlanc W into 4 people and it kills all of them, you don't really know how much dedication or time or practice went into that. But I think that was the biggest thing for me, is how dedicated they were to being perfect. Like, they were in this pursuit of perfection, and they were looking for it from everywhere. So a lot of the students would research things like their diet. They would be eating high potassium foods for their brain. They would be looking for the best way to like oxygenate their blood after long periods of sitting. Some of them would find, like, they would go to oxygen bars on the weekend. So in Seoul, there were these oxygen bars you could go to, and they'd pay like $20 to like just sit and breathe pure oxygen, in hopes that it would help them think better. And I think that's been the biggest parallel for me, is that because there's not much of a front office as far as like these support staff that sports have, the players are left kind of developing this on their own. And I think that speaks to their passion as well, is that they're willing to do this, to like create this tertiary field around them and just do it themselves.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. That's something that I've struggled with personally to see in professional sports. I think a lot of sports, and I guess gaming in a similar sense, the barriers to entry are really low, right? Like, anyone could go kick a football around a field. Anyone could, I don't know, on your mobile, right? You can play League of Legends.
Uh-huh.
The app's literally free. But it's not until you kind of see people frequently compete at an elite level, whatever it is, that they start talking about a matter of inches. I don't know, like Formula One, for example. If they gain 100th of a second in a corner over their opposition, like, that can make all the difference between winning and losing, right? Or if, I don't know, a football quarterback can throw an inch further than, I don't know, it's a matter of such minutiae and such small detail that makes the difference. And there's no reason why that shouldn't be the case for League of Legends or any other competitors in the esport realm. So that's really interesting. In terms of media, because we're a sport media podcast, and I think we could very easily go down the rabbit hole of kind of like esports and the athletes compared to traditional sports athletes. And in terms of the media, and in terms of communicating this kind of this competitive edge that they've got, or the same emotion, because having edited videos of esports, that's one of my biggest issues. Is like they literally sit there, they're like plugged into the matrix, right? There's no emotion that you don't, that you see on a football pitch or on a wherever. So in terms of kind of the media side of it, what big differences have you seen?
Yeah, so from a sports media perspective, like obviously with media, especially as you're like cutting trailers or highlight reels, you want to see those big moments, right? You want to see that show of emotion. You want to see like what's happening. And I think for esports especially, it tends to be a little bit more of a less emotional field for some of the players, unless it's a very big game. And I think that's where the problem lies, especially is in attracting new players. It's very difficult when you're showing someone an esport, unless it's a very simple one like Rocket League, you're having to, explain the game, and then you explain what's happening and who's winning. And with a game like League of Legends, it can be very difficult to know who's winning because it's such a complex game. Or like Dota, right? If someone's playing Dota, a super complex game, there's 80 champions or heroes. You've got a huge map. You've got like over 200 items, and just it's so that sort of barrier to entry. There are people who've played the game in a League of Legends for years and still don't know core mechanics about it. And so when you've got like casual viewers who want to just sit down with a beer, watch the game, that's a major issue. You have to find a way to bridge that gap. I think that the breakthrough in sports media, especially when it comes to League of Legends, will come from a way to intentionally simplify the game down to its core components. And where I think that would come in would be two separate streams, essentially a casual stream and a hardcore stream. The casual stream would be more of like a red side's winning, blue side's winning, like, something more casual. And then the hardcore stream would have all the data that people are watching. And I think that's probably going to be the future. I know that Riot Games has experimented with like a beginner's broadcast where the casters explain more about the game. But really, I think that needs to be the main draw. It needs to be you go in and there's just two big numbers and it's like, oh yeah, these guys are ahead right now. Just like you can sit down in front of a soccer game or a football game and go, oh, it's 7-0. The 7 is winning. I think that's going to be the future as far as attracting a mainstream audience that doesn't play the game. And that's where League of Legends that's the game I focus on the most, but that's where League of Legends kind of fails compared to more casual, or I would say easier to understand games. Like Rocket League is essentially cars and soccer, and that's it. It's just 3v3, and you can understand it. You're like, okay, they're trying to get the ball into the net. I get it. Or a game like Overwatch can be very confusing to watch, but it's like these guys want to make this car go to the end of the line, and you kind of understand that push and pull. So the thing is that you've got an issue where the most popular esport in the world is also the most complex. I think what's going to happen is League of Legends won't be the biggest esport for very long. I think the next 2 or 3 years there'll be a new esport of some sort that comes onto the field. It explodes, and it's like the premier esport, and I don't know what that is yet. I don't even think it's been announced, but there will be something that is easier to understand, more interesting to play, and has a broader like just viewership appeal. That is media first. I think media first esports are the future.
So all this sort of modernizing or making it a more simpler format for League of Legends, it sounds a lot like cricket is doing. I don't know how much you follow cricket, but there's always adaptations in the rules and how many players or whatever on the field. Just a quick question, again, linking it back to myself and Jamie's background. So for the next big esport, or what sort of differences are there between something like League of Legends, which is fantasy, and an esport version of a traditional sport like FIFA or Formula One games? Is there much difference in the community or popularity from what you observe?
Yeah, so right now there's two major esports, in the most traditional sense. FIFA and NBA 2K. I know FIFA is very popular in Europe and NBA 2K is very popular in the United States. I think the biggest hurdle to both of those is people look at it like, let's say, I tell people this all the time. Esports will have made it not when I watch it. Esports will make it when my parents watch it. And if my parents are watching esports on the TV, that's when I know that it's reached mainstream popularity. And I think the major hurdle for digital sports in that sense is a lot of people say, why can't you just do it? Right. So it's like if you see two guys sitting on a stage playing NBA 2K against each other, they're just playing, basketball on an Xbox. You wonder, like, could they not just go play basketball like a 1v1? And I think to an extent that kind of sells it short. What's interesting is as the esport develops, and same with FIFA, as FIFA esports develop, it becomes less, I would say more divorced from the real sport. The strategies change, and the game kind of evolves and develops in that way. So I think the biggest hurdle is actually people's mental hurdle is like, oh, this is just soccer. Why would I not just watch Barcelona versus, Real Madrid? Or why would I not just watch, the Premier League, as opposed to just watching two guys sit on a stage and play soccer or football against each other? I think that's the biggest one. But I have watched those esports and they are very popular, especially with the younger generation. And I think that they do have a future. It's just, I think it remains to be seen how niche that future will be, as opposed to, if that will take over in the future. And I think, not to be an alarmist, but if climate change continues the way it has, if pollution continues the way it has, it might be nearly impossible for youth leagues or under 14s or whatever to be able to play. And especially in the United States, here's what's interesting is there's been a major movement against football, American football. It's very concussive as a sport. There's a lot of injuries. Pretty much every single professional game you see, there's 2, 3, 4, 5 injuries, or concussions or whatever. I think parents, well, I know parents are not allowing their children to play football. I think if any sport or esport has a major potential, it would be the NFL and kind of digitizing their sport for youth. I think that's going to be that has major potential. And unfortunately, Roger Goodell, the commissioner of the NFL, is an absolute moron, so he doesn't know about this. But I would love to see the NFL move into esports in a big way.
So you mentioned just then watching people sat on a stage playing NBA 2K, as well as the NFL going sort of digital as well. So I guess that's kind of leads us nicely into the other topic that we wanted to discuss with you, like the metaverse. So the metaverse, from my limited understanding, it's not you physically going to a stadium to watch guys playing on the console. It's you being at home, VR headset on, being in a virtual stadium. Is that a very entry level explanation of the metaverse, or can you put it better?
Yeah, sure. So right now, if you ask 5 people what the metaverse is, you'll get 5 different answers. But so far, there's a kind of a general consensus, which is the easiest way to explain it would be 3D websites. It'll be 3D websites. But essentially, think about it like this. Right now, you live in the metaverse. And the way you do it is like let's say you get home after work, you're tired, you want food, right? You get on your phone, you order food to your house. Ordinarily, you'd have to call someone, but instead, you just do this. Then let's say you're swiping on Tinder. So ordinarily, Tinder would have been going to a bar back 10, 15 years ago, but now you're swiping on Tinder, you meet someone nice, she says, hey, I'm out right now, do you want to come meet me? And you say sure. So then you pick up your phone, you get an Uber to your house, right? And in that case, ordinarily, that would have been you walking out onto the street and hailing a cab. So the metaverse is sort of, the idea of it is the digital extension of our self becomes more important than our physical self. And you already see this with NFTs. I personally not a major fan of NFTs. However, you see people spending $10,000 on what they believe is a verifiably unique like profile picture. And they want to put it on Twitter and have it verified, a little hexagon and everything like that. So in those cases, they are saying their digital self is more important than their physical self. The generation that will see this in the most extreme way would be Gen Z. You've got Gen Z kids who are e-dating, so they're dating on Discord. They're just like falling asleep on voice chat and FaceTiming constantly. And so they might have a full-on romantic relationship with someone for a year that they've never met. And now, as far as the metaverse is concerned, where this is leading to is the mass adoption of VR, and that's where a lot of the investment is going. Currently, obviously, Meta, the company formerly known as Facebook, they've got Oculus, their VR company. They're preparing to release Project Cambria, I think this year, which is going to be a very upgraded new version of the Oculus Quest 2, which is, if you don't have it, I highly recommend you get it. Oculus Quest 2 is a fantastic platform, very enjoyable. It's been very interesting. But as far as the metaverse is concerned, essentially it will be when most of our behaviors as people have been abstracted to an online or virtual world. That's when we've reached the metaverse. And so for esports, what I think, one of the major things I think the metaverse will help is esports live events, because esports has the most distributed fan base of any sport or any kind of entertainment. And so you've got you've got fans in Saudi Arabia, you've got fans in China, fans in Korea that might all be fans of the same team, like let's say G2 that's in Germany, right? So they might all be fans of G2. If G2 is having a live game, you could have a virtual event, and then fans from all over the world could enter a virtual stadium and watch their team perform. Where I think it beats the real world is you could also have virtual meet and greets. And so you could basically have the players, put on headsets, and then you've got their avatars, and people could go up and actually talk to them one-on-one. And I think a lot of people are not seeing the potential in this, but it's got huge potential. Just because you'll see people spend $100 or $200 as a donation on Twitch just to kind of get a response from their favorite streamer, right? It's just a response, not even a conversation. But I think there's a huge potential in allowing people to enter the metaverse, watch a game virtually, and then meet their favorite player.
That's really interesting. The various bits that we could pick up on there. That's one of the better explanations I've heard of the metaverse, actually. And it's like, oh, okay. Do you think it's been accelerated by the ongoing COVID pandemic in the last couple of years? And I don't want to dwell on it too much, but my point is, perhaps recently we've some big footballers have done meet and greet via video call. The fans won through a competition, an opportunity to the video call with this football player. And it seems like a logical next step would be, you know what, like let's give away Oculus Rifts or give away some kind of virtual headset as part of the competition, and you can have a virtual meet and greet, which feels a bit more immersive than just a video call. But the video call thing's come about because of the pandemic protocol, the COVID protocol that La Liga and Premier League and Serie A have put in place. So is it something that you think has kind of been driven forward more rapidly, more recently?
Yeah, 100%. I think that, I've said this before, people have gotten mad at me. I think COVID has been one of the best things that's ever happened for the world. Just, I don't want to say that the dead, I'm not making light of that. But as far as the advancement of industry, I think it's been fantastic. You've got, massive amounts of industries that can moving to remote work. I think that's really accelerated it. And you have this, I think what's more important is this mass comfort with virtual events, virtual things. For example, my mother's a realtor, okay, and she's used to doing her work in person with other people. During the pandemic, she's not a very tech savvy person. She got much more comfortable actually like going online, going on Zoom, doing, virtual shows with people, going to virtual conferences, like those sorts of things, even if it's just Zoom and, a two-dimensional screen, not VR. I think that comfort is the foundation for the metaverse. And I think that that has become far more comfortable for people around the world. And so, yeah, I do think that the pandemic has absolutely pushed this forward, and it's accelerated the process dramatically, and like you said, people paid for a video call with their favorite footballer. I think that's exactly what I'm talking about. If you've been in VR, the hard thing about VR is that if you haven't experienced it, you don't get it, and it's just, I don't mean that in a bad way, but it's just, if you haven't used it and really understood what it can do, it's hard to grasp why it's so compelling. Um, but it's also is part of the realism, I think, of it is your brain is very good at understanding abstraction. So once you're in the metaverse, once you're, let's say, playing around in Oculus Quest, you're in Horizon Worlds, um, a little cartoon floating head and torso comes up to you and they talk to you. And for a second, you're like, this is kind of weird. And then once you start talking to someone else, and you're like, where are you from? And they're like, oh, I'm from Ottawa. You're like, oh, Canada, that's cool. I've never been to Ottawa. How do you like it? And they're like, oh, it's pretty cool. That once you start having those human connections, that sort of parasocial relationship, it's so fascinating how A, it's addictive, B, it feels so real. I've met people in the metaverse, in Horizon Worlds or Rec Room or Big Screen. They're just awesome, cool, interesting people to talk to. And it's so fascinating, like how their little character becomes them in my head. When I log into a common space, I see them there. It's like that's them, right? That's my friend Mary. That's my friend, Doug. I see them and it's like there's no that's a little cartoon character, they're talking through a microphone. The experience is so seamless, it feels very real. And so if I met a famous person, a famous footballer, famous esports player in the metaverse in Big Screen or Horizon, I would have that same feeling of like excitement, trepidation, whatever that you would have from meeting them in real life. The only difference is they're far more accessible. And I think that's where the benefit is. And so far, there haven't been very many people who've really capitalized on this or understood that this is a great direction to go. So, like, imagine if you could meet Messi or Ronaldo in VR, it would feel much more real. And I think one thing that speaks to this is there was a lady who recently filed a lawsuit against Meta because she was groped by, like, virtually groped by some kids in Horizon World. And on one hand, we can laugh and say like, "Oh, that's ridiculous." On the other hand, I understand where she's coming from. It feels, it once you're in it and you kind of get immersed, it feels very real. And something like that, that has a very real analog and a dramatic analog to the real world. It can feel very traumatic, just like a real moment, like meeting your favorite sports player would have, a good feeling or a positive outcome overall. So yeah, I think there's a huge amount of potential. I think the COVID pandemic has absolutely accelerated this progress, and I think since the pandemic's not over, I think we're going to see a lot more progress in the next year.
So when we did like history at high school, one of the classic questions would be, yeah, World War One was a good thing because it accelerated medicine. So you've kind of done a modern day twist. The pandemic is a good thing because it accelerates the progress into the metaverse. So we've used the example of your parents sort of being maybe skeptical about Zoom, but now your mum's an expert. So what do you think would lead to someone like of your parents' generation to buy a headset, or is a headset not always necessary for this type of metaverse experience that you described?
I've talked to some people before. Some people believe that a headset was not necessary. I personally think it is. There is an insanely compelling facet to VR that a lot of people don't understand. So like I have one. I have an Oculus Quest 2. When my extended family came to my parents' house for Christmas, I let my grandparents play around with it. I let my uncle play around with it, my cousins, and my brother. My brother, my uncle, and my cousin and my aunt all purchased one that day. So they played with it. It was so interesting to them. They immediately purchased one. And these are people that are not necessarily gamers. They're not necessarily, super tech savvy, but they saw the immediate benefit and like how amazing of technology it is. And I think that that's going to be the defining moment once it's sort of viral, right? When someone gets it, they let you play with it, you see it, and you're excited. It's a little bit like the first iPhone launch. When the iPhone launched, it was a touch screen, right? It was glass, it was fragile, and people were like, "Why would I pay for this? I like my BlackBerry keyboard." But then once you played with one, your friend says, "Hey, got this new phone, check it out." They play with it. You're like, "Oh my God, that is so cool. Actually, I need one." I feel like the way iPhone had a big adoption and then it was kind of a slow growth off of that, I think that that's going to be the same as VR. So right now, Oculus and VR just had its best year ever. The Oculus Quest on Christmas, the Oculus app was the best selling iPhone app, which means it's a companion app for the headset. It means people were excited, they were downloading it. They had just gotten one for Christmas. I think that this is kind of the start of the critical mass adoption for VR. So I do think the VR is going to be a necessary component. What I think would be a big seller for it would be VR events. So an example, a friend of mine is the CEO of a company called Asimula. They're doing VR events for K-pop, for regular American music, and for esports. And they were recently reached out to by someone in the music industry who has connections to Metallica. If anyone is going to go to a virtual concert, it would be Metallica fans, which tend to be on the older side, might not be interested in standing in line for hours in a crowded auditorium, whereas they could watch a virtual concert from their couch. They've got their beer next to them. They've got their own bed, their own bathroom, no traffic. I think things like that are going to be what drive it over someone like Mark Zuckerberg saying, "Hey, now you work in the metaverse. Have fun."
I guess price point for VR headsets as well would be a big issue. Once they become affordable, I don't know, the same price as a smartphone or whatever, everyone will be going out and buying them.
That's true. Oculus Quest, you can get it right now. I think Meta just said that they're selling it at a loss, so you can get one for $300.
Oh, wow, okay.
New. And the Quest 2, if you want to get the upgraded version, you can get it for $400. So it's reaching there.
Yeah. It's certainly not, beyond if you compare it to like a PlayStation 5 or something.
Yeah,
it's very affordable. So just to kind of try and to close the circle a little bit here, I think you've explained everything really well, like esports and metaverse. How would Stuart and I, for example, let's keep it low scale. I'm not going to go and talk about Manchester United or New York Giants or whatever. How would we go about getting into the metaverse? So instead of us doing a video call now, how could we do a virtual interaction? How could we build ourselves a virtual studio and make sure we sit down and have a kind of a bit more of an immersive interview?
Sure. So it's actually shockingly easy. What you could do is first of all, you just buy a set. I would recommend the Oculus Quest 2 because it's just so cheap. And it's fantastic.
You're getting paid by
I'm not. You know what? I wish I literally emailed them and I was like, look, if you let me sell these, I'm going to sell more than you've ever seen. But no, Mark Zuckerberg hates me. So I wish I was. So I would recommend the Oculus Quest 2 just because it's the cheapest one on the market. It's solid. It's got a good battery life and it's standalone is the biggest thing. You don't need a powerful computer to hook it up to. You get one of those, you can download Rec Room or Big Screen. Big Screen has a meeting room app. There's also Horizon Workrooms, any of these apps. And then in those apps, you can either build a studio for yourself, or you could hire someone like me and my company, Fox and Farthing, and we would build a metaverse physical location for you. And then people could actually go into this and they could watch you. The good thing is it's fairly cheap as far as, considering you guys wouldn't have to be in the same location and you wouldn't have to necessarily pay for rent. It's a one-time cost as far as paying someone to build it, but you could also build it yourself. And in that case, it would be free. It would be $400 for the headset. And then after that, you download a free app, you build an area in it for free, and that's it. So
it's not like paying to host on a website or.
No, it's 100% free. And people with the code or the link could actually go in and they could watch this show live. And the cool thing is they would be able to see your avatar and Stuart's avatar sitting next to each other behind a desk or something. And then after the show, walk up and ask questions of your guests or whatever. So yeah, if on a small scale, that's more or less how it works.
So there's a huge office skyscraper being built just the other side of my apartment building. So PricewaterhouseCoopers, they should have not bothered and just thought every employee had said and built meeting rooms on the metaverse. I think they missed a trick there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of enthusiasts are gonna say, "Oh, it'll take over everything." No, it won't. I came from a blue collar background. My family was working class. I would, when I was 14, 15 years old, I was cleaning windows, shoveling walks, raking yards. I worked around construction workers, truckers. Do I think the whole world is going to go completely virtual, be Ready Player One in 2 years? No, I don't think so. And I think anyone who tells you that is delusional or drunk or both. I think the thing is that a lot of industries will have a VR component, just like a lot of industries have an online component. I think for the metaverse, it'll just be a form of immersive website. You've got companies that are on Twitter, they're on Instagram, they're on Facebook. They use that as a way to connect with their customers. I think that's going to be the primary use of the metaverse for the next 10 years. And that, it'll be like Wendy's or Sainsbury's is going to have like some sort of customer service, outlet in VR. And if you want to go talk to someone or you want to see some event that they're having, you would be able to do that. I think that'll be the primary use for it. I don't think it's going to be people sitting at home in a virtual office with their little goggles on, working on a screen. I just don't think that's going to happen for a good long time.
Are we going to, maybe they already exist, are we going to see a virtual Old Trafford or a virtual United Centre or?
Yeah, I think we will, actually. I think we will. I've talked to some people who work. Yesterday I was on a call with the largest AV supplier in the world. They do AV for the World Cup. They do it for Microsoft, for Disney, Epcot. It's these massive companies. And he was talking that there's a lot of interest in moving to a virtual event. And essentially it would be like, boxing or soccer, be pay-per-view, but in VR. And so you pay $20 for entry. And the great thing is it's essentially unlimited as far as how many people they can fit in the stadium. So the question would be, would you be interested in paying $20 for a virtual ticket to the World Cup instead of flying to Qatar this year or flying to South Africa or wherever? I think for a lot of people, it would hinge on, can they use a digital vuvuzela? And if the answer was yes, then they might be more interested. But I think for a lot of people, I think for a surprising amount of people, the answer would be yes.
I think certainly for that price point, definitely. I mean, for $20 to get the stadium atmosphere, I'm sure that would be a crazy experience. So maybe after this conversation this afternoon or this morning for you, I'm going to get my headset all ready for Qatar this winter. So, Lowell, you've been a fantastic guest. We've both learned so much about esports and metaverse, and we could have done 10 more episodes. But what we do is as our tradition here on 21 for 21, we ask our guests for a lesson in their sort of industry within sport and media. So, if you could sum up what you've said today in just one lesson, what would that be?
I would say that the number one takeaway or lesson here would be esports and the metaverse. It's for everyone. It's not a niche thing anymore. I think it's reached a point where it has a low enough barrier for entry. Anyone can enter it. It's very cheap. It's exciting. It's easy to get into, and I think that it's also very profitable for businesses. So I think right now is the best time for anyone who's interested in this space to just get into it, start exploring, and look for opportunities.
As Stuart said, you've been an amazing guest, so informative, but in such a clear way. You've explained stuff in certainly what I've been able to understand completely. So thank you very much. Give yourself a promo. Where can we find you? How can the fans follow you? Or
Sure. So I publish a lot of papers on LinkedIn, so people are welcome to find me at LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is www.linkedin.com/sakebomb, like the drink. Also, my company website, Fox and Farthing, is www.foxandfarthing.com. We provide VR app development and metaverse design for companies that are looking to host events in VR. So.
Great. So I noticed no, you hate Mark Zuckerberg, or he hates you. So no Facebook, no Instagram, no Meta products. Good to hear. Yeah.
Well, I have them, but they're more personal, and I just kind of shitpost on them. So I would be afraid that people would just see that.
Nice. Good. Well, thanks to everyone for listening. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. And yeah, thanks again for joining us, Lowell.
All right. Thank you guys so much for having me.